Hi, this is Mike Gant, and this is episode 14 of Bible Basics. And I'm going to title this one Dan Brown and Pop Culture. And the last couple of times I've talked to you about modern biblical scholarship versus ancient biblical scholarship on the subject of New Testament formation and more specifically New Testament authorship, who wrote these books. And I've shown you that there's a big difference between the way modern scholars determine who the authors are and ancient scholars thought they were. And I think there's just, the case is overwhelming that the ancient scholars knew more what they were talking about. And I'm trying to walk you through that so that sharing with you the reasons for my conviction so that you can see why I think that. And I hope you'll be fully persuaded of it as I am. But I do warn you that in the world we live in today, especially with this narcissistic, prideful age in which we live, it's very, very difficult to get people to see this because they just can't imagine. How could people back then know as much as we know today? They were so dumb. They did slavery, and we're smart enough not to do that. Ignoring the fact that, all of us who are living today were born into a world that doesn't have slavery, at least not anywhere near us. It's really easy to be against something when you're not tempted to do it. Nobody's tempted to enslave anybody, make somebody a slave back like they were in the beginning of the United States. You put yourself in those people's worlds, and they inherited something that had been in place for a long, long time. It's just not that easy to get rid of it. But anyway, today we want to transition from talking about that modern scholarship versus biblical scholarship to talk about culture, pop culture. When I say pop culture, I don't mean so much hip and trendy things, although that's part of it, but just the way people think today. And so the point of view of modern scholars, modern biblical scholars, has been passed down into the culture, just like, higher education in the U.S. through higher education, things like DEI and critical theory and these academic notions that are so non-commonsensical gain sway because you go to school, if they teach something at school, like they teach evolution at school, and people grow up through elementary school and high school and then higher education. And the most educated people believe sometimes the most foolish things, because the farther you go in education, the more you tend to be, in this age, indoctrinated, propagandized to believe certain things. And so it's just very commonplace for people in common culture, to the degree that they are exposed to modern biblical scholarship, to assume that, there's only, out of the 27 writings in the New Testament, you got the 7 undisputed Paulines, that is 7 letters of the 14 Paul supposedly wrote. There were only 7 that he actually wrote, according to them. And as I think I've said, there are biblical scholars who stick with the traditional authorial ascriptions, but these are not the celebrated, well-known, successful, most successful and financially well-off people. That belongs to people who hold this modern, what they call historical critical view of things. And that has bled down into the broader culture. So, for example, throughout the internet, this is commonplace. If you read any article about Bible authorship, say in Wikipedia, it's going to be filled with this kind of nonsense. And again, being very disparaging of the ancient view, not giving it proper credit, not really understanding it. And I experience this regularly. I was on a Reddit string this, well, I have been, I think, for the last week or two. Actually, different threads. There's a Christianity thread, and then there's a couple of true Christianity and something else. But anyway, Christianity is the biggest one. So I would post something on there about the fact that the ancient authorship ascriptions are true. And I stated this in different ways, and people would respond. And, they just, for the most part, they think I'm nuts. It's not just that they think that I'm wrong. It's that they don't even understand the argument that I'm making. They are just basically parrot what things like what things they learned, things like what Bart Ehrman and his ilk teach. I labeled one of the threads Ehrman heirs, and but you just can't believe the bile, and it comes. Their disapproval comes with bile. They just find it hard to engage on it, and a lot of times, and this is common when I have been online, any type of online forum, that they think I'm trolling them. Like, it's the hardest thing to get, no, I'm not trolling you. I really do believe this. I got the same thing if I'll say something about everyone is going to heaven or second coming has already occurred. Those are the kind of, you're operating in bad faith. You're trolling this, we're going to delete you. And I do. I get blocked. I get deleted. I get all those kinds of things. But this, you just do, I'm trying to point out that you do run into this way of thinking a lot. And, more broadly, you run into people on the internet. There's a whole group of people now called Jesus mythicists. They believe that, modern biblical scholarship, people like Ehrman have taught them that, well, the Bible's, the New Testament's been changed. People added stuff to it, like the miracles. They made up stuff. It wasn't written by the people who originally wrote it. It was added to over years. It was legendary. It was built up. They've heard that. They just carried that idea to its logical extreme and said they just made up the whole character Jesus. Ehrman and his kind of Bible scholar say that Jesus was a real person and that he did teach, but it's hard to figure out exactly what he taught, stuff like that. Well, these internet Jesus mythicists, they just, as I say, go all the way, and they say the whole idea is mythical, legendary. There never was a Jesus. He was just invented by people, and here's some more Ehrman-like people. I guess you can't read that. It says the 5 Gospels. What did Jesus really say? And I think the 5th Gospel they add is the Gospel of Thomas. I got this thing not because I wanted to believe it, but I wanted to understand what possesses people to write the things they write. And they're sitting there picking, okay, Jesus, here's all the things Jesus said in the Bible, all the red letters. And they voted on it, on each verse or each story from the New Testament and the Gospels, and said things like, okay, he probably said this, he probably didn't say this or do this, he surely did this. I mean, it's unbelievable the lengths to which they go to discredit what we have in the Bible. To understand anything Jesus said, you'd have to have one of these guys working full time in a spare room in your house that you could go ask him, hey, do I believe this verse? What about the next one? It's craziness. But anyway, these Jesus mythicists, they're so off track that even people like Ehrman argue with him. Ehrman himself wrote a book. I read it, and it was like, I can't remember what the title was, but his whole point was, yes, Jesus really did exist. So he's been so successful and sold so many books that he's now got people believing too much of what he says. He's been telling people they can't trust what the New Testament says. So they just take him at his word, go to a logical conclusion. And he's like, no, I didn't mean that. So you got Ehrman kind of positioned himself in the middle. Okay, I'm not like these wacky Jesus mythicists who believe Jesus never existed, but I'm also not like these wacky people who believe that Jesus really was raised from the dead, really was who he claimed to be, really was the fulfillment of the Jewish scriptures. He's got himself, everybody's an extremist, and that's the way people use the word extremist. They position themselves and they see everybody to their right and left as an extremist, and they're middle of the road. So you can have a really extremist idea, and as long as you can find somebody to the right of you and somebody to the left of you, you can consider yourself a mainstream guy. So the ideas of modern scholarship have produced a Bart Ehrman who makes a lot of money selling books, getting people to doubt the historical reliability of the New Testament. And then it's also produced a whole generation of skeptics, of people who believe that the New Testament is not historically reliable. Some even go so far as to say Jesus never really existed. This is the world we live in today. Bart Ehrman, I may have mentioned in the sessions or the episodes I did on him, he teaches a freshman biblical studies class and University of North Carolina, and has for years, maybe like 20 years or more. So he's just indoctrinating a whole group of kids. This is one of those big lecture hall classes. They probably have, I don't know, it seems like you would have like 150 students at a time. And, University of North Carolina, middle of the Bible Belt, a lot of kids come. It seems like an easy elective for a lot of these church kids. They go and they get completely stripped of whatever reasons for faith they had. And Bart will say, I'm not trying to convince anybody of anything. I'm just telling them the truth. It's very, very upsetting to any kind of objective-minded person to listen to his spiel. Because a lot of people, he was a born-again Christian, and he wandered away from it. And it's sort of like he wants everybody else to wander away from it too. So he's got an axe to grind, but he's always saying he doesn't, and that's off-putting as well. So anyway, I'll have to, there's more. I didn't get to Dan Brown this time. I'll get to Dan Brown next time. But I appreciate your listening, and I hope you'll take these things to heart and know step by step that the ancients, they knew who gave them those writings. They know where they came from. Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, Paul and Peter, James and Jude, 8 men, sometimes with help, but they're the ones who are responsible for these 27 texts they call the New Testament. They put their lives on their line. They weren't like, people that are writing books like this that get royalties. They weren't getting royalties for what they wrote. They were getting whipped and chased and tortured and sometimes killed. So these people paid a great price for us to know what happened. That's what they wrote about. What happened. That's what history is. What happened. And we can trust it. God bless you.